Aquí continuem amb la marxa perquè aquí tenim una ponència sobre la normativa d'Estònia, que és un país referent en el món de l'administració electrònica i del tractament de dades. Sempre mirem cap al nord. El món de les dades i dels arxius no tot és tecnologia. Tenir moltes dades i utilitzar les eines més avançades pot generar problemes si no es té en compte com regular la seva utilització per generar un marc de confiança i de seguretat. Això també en vam parlar ahir, en general. La confiança i la seguretat, quan parlem de dades, és molt important. És el que està passant ara, per exemple, amb la intel·ligència artificial, que se'ns en va de les mans. Encara avui sentia aquest matí a la ràdio tot el tema de la normativa que el govern dels Estats Units s'hi està posant, en fi. Sense un mínim de reglamentació, el món de les dades seria com el salvatge oest. És a dir, hi ha d'haver una regulació i en aquesta regulació la part ètica també és molt important. Doncs bé, amb tot aquest context, Estònia és un dels països del món més avançats en el desplegament de l'administració absolutament digital. L'èxit no és exclusivament de la tecnologia, sinó de la manera en què la governança de les dades s'ha regulat des d'un punt de vista normatiu a escala global, és a dir, que afecta a tots els nivells i també a tots els àmbits de l'administració d'una manera transversal. Ara en parlem amb Kuldar, ell és director del programa de governança de dades del govern d'Estònia. Hem de dir que en aquest càrrec és responsable d'establir un ecosistema sostenible de persones, directrius i eines que ajudin a garantir que les dades del sector públic d'Estònia siguin fàcils de trobar, reutilitzables i de bona qualitat. Ara ens ho explicarà amb més detall. Rebem amb un fort aplaudiment a Kuldar.
Thank you very much. And I would also, it's kind of getting already to be like a cliche, but I'm also very grateful to the local Archivist Society for the invitation and the possibility to be here. So the Catalan Archivist Society is something which work I have always monitored very closely, and I really think you are one of the most advanced, most innovative societies in the archival domain in the world. And having been to the ICA conference in Girona a few years ago, I have no doubt that you will make the greatest ICA Congress in Barcelona as well happen. But coming to my talk, the initial title was more about the legal and organizational aspects of data, but on the last minute I decided to change it a little bit, because the laws and the organizations are just a reflection of what we really want to do with data. So instead, I kind of, in the last minute, retitled my presentation to be, what does it take to become a data-driven society? And I'm going to talk more about the kind of intentions of the Estonian government, what we want to do, where we want to end up, and then in the end also come to the legal side and what we think of it. What you see here now on the slide is then the Estonian Digital Government Agenda 2030. So that's the leading document of our government, which presents the high-level goals of where we want to get to. So the main thing that we have defined is the best experience for the Estonian citizens, best experience for the Estonian public sector, for the private sector institutions. And it means that it should be as easy as possible to talk to the state, to talk to the government, to talk to the public sector, to get your services. The meaning of this best experience is also explained with the leaps or the main kind of advances we want to do over the next 6 or 7 years. One of the main things is the switch to live event-based and proactive services, meaning that, for example, when you having life on its own, if you give birth to a child, then obviously there are a number of different administrative steps that you need to take. So first you need to register the birth, you need to give a name to your child, You need to register for some benefits, potentially at some point also for a kindergarten. You need to register the point of residence of the child. So it's actually a series of services, government, public sector services that you need to use based on one life event. And what we want to do as a next step in Estonian e-government is kind of binding these into a single kind of flow of services, life event-based services, and also, where possible, making services proactive. You don't need to go to a government portal to get access to a service, but the government comes to you. The government has from somewhere the information that, yes, you have a new child, and then is coming to offer you some kind of benefits or some kind of support, and you only need to click yes or no. Yes, I want to accept. No, I don't want to accept this offer, instead of going and asking for the benefit yourself. We also want to become more AI-powered, so wherever possible, leaving the tedious manual work behind and doing as much as possible using AI. One sub-theme there is also the data-driven governance and reuse of data. Data-driven decision-making is a big word in Estonia currently. Human centricity and green digital government is something that we want to do as well. So you will notice that many of the aspects of what we want to do are actually data-driven, data requirements, data needs. For all of this to happen by 2030, data needs to be really in a very, very good state. So the FAIR principles were already mentioned by Eero. So basically, as a government, we need to make sure that throughout the public sector, all the data we have is findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And while I often hear much praise about the Estonian state and working on a daily basis inside the government, I can say that potentially things are not as good always as they should. So if you really want data to be always accessible, then there are still agencies who not even have a good overview of their data sets and their data. Even if the agencies themselves have some overview, then they are not regularly publishing this information. So information about what data agencies have is not publicly available, publicly findable for everybody. The descriptions are not understandable, they are not of good quality, or they are inconsistent. Data itself is not too easily accessible, access to data is slow, etc., etc. And beyond just the accessibility, also the quality of data matters. So if you want to make a data-driven decision, let's say in a municipality, on public transport, and the underlying data on how people, the citizens, use public transportation is flawed, is not of good quality, then the decision will not be good either. So it really we need to put much more effort into data quality. And here are just some examples we have got from Estonian state registers a few years ago. So, for example, the car accidents registry have shows that there are actually quite a few number of accidents happening in Iran or off the coast of South Africa, which technically seen is a very simple mistake. Instead of putting a coordinates onto the northern hemisphere, you are putting it into the southern hemisphere. And Estonia is about the same distance from the North Pole than South Africa is from the South Pole. So that's where the data lands you up in the end of the day. The oldest person to receive a Presidential Medal of Honor is 1,932 years old, somehow. And also, one of the best examples we have is that we tried to do a registry-based census in 2021. So if you're not familiar with the concept of registry-based censuses, then basically the idea is that when the state already has all the information about citizens, then you don't need to go door to door, spend a lot of resources in gathering information about people, but you can reuse the information in registries. And we started this process already in 2013, 2014, trying to understand what it does take to a registry-based census, and it really quickly came out that much of the information is actually misleading, especially when it comes to information about residents, so where people are living, which people are living together and forming a family, occupational information as well. So it's just showing that the kind of quality of information in the registers, which maybe is good enough when we are working on a daily basis and we find out individual problems with data quality and solve them one by one, is not sufficient when we are starting to do kind of large-scale data analysis and data manipulation. So in the end of the day, the whole census itself costs about 16 million euros, and 8 million of that went purely for improving some of the base registries in terms of data exchange and also data quality. The usual question when I present these arguments is that, Estonia is so good in everything electronic. Estonia is a brand. So how come that data management is not in a similarly good situation? And the point is that really the focus has been elsewhere. Starting from the mid-2000s and more around 2010, very much the focus of Estonia was on the delivery of e-services. We wanted to become the best country in delivering e-services, electronic services, to citizens, and that meant that everybody was just working on this service concept. You go somewhere into the government portal, you input some information, you identify yourself, and then you can access to the state. You can do everything. We have been used saying that in Estonia you can do everything electronically, except of getting married and getting divorced. But again, the needs of data and the whole concept that we have also heard about yesterday, data as an asset, is something that needs more attention and it needs a different mindset. And that's something that we have only started to do since the late 2010s. So in 2018 was the kind of turning point where the Estonian government got its first chief data officer appointed, and that was the start of kind of focused, organized data governance in the Estonian public sector. And right now, this year, we are just about to finalize the Estonian government data strategy, which is basically talking about the whole flow, what we want to do with data, so starting from the value chain of data. We create or gather data, we manage data, publish, find and understand, reuse, and what does it take to have this whole value chain covered with reasonable actions, reasonable things in the public sector. The core of what we do is obviously a set of standardized rules and guidelines. So always you need to have this foundation to do whatever you want to. But in our discussion, we came to the conclusion that actually the things, the practical actions we need to concentrate on is less about the specific tools, procedures, guidelines, and rules, but it's all more the soft side, the human side. Awareness, skills, and competencies really quickly in our discussions emerged as one major thing to do. Giving support, providing good tools is relevant as well, of course, and citizen centricity. So let's dig a little bit into these 5 different areas. And first, I want to mention awareness. And yesterday, the last presentation was really good in the sense also that it mentioned the same message. Management involvement is must. You can't do data governance if your bosses, if your leadership is not involved, if they are not supporting you. And so when I said that the CDO in Estonia started in 2018, then one of the first tasks he did for the first few years was to just go around directors, go to the government, go to the ministers, chancellors, and talk about what good is data for, so presenting use cases. If you are the Minister of Environment, then showing potentially a good example of how in Canada there is a large management system based on data, going to the Ministry of Economics, showing how you can use data to monitor the health of the private sector, companies, etc. Now that's the first step, convincing that data is something you need to manage and data is something that you can get benefits out of, and really visualizing it with examples. The second step is then to actually explain that it's not only the good side, but then you also need to invest in data. So what is data governance? What you need to do in data governance? What are the steps you need to do? And especially the skills, the people you need to hire in the end of the day. And of course, also talking about the limitations, regulations, and ethics of data reuse. It's not always just the technical side. Yes, there are many things that we can do with data, but it's also the downside. What can be the potential misuse? What can happen wrong? What wrong things can happen? So it's, in the end of the day, very much about talking to the management about the profit and costs. What are the benefits? What are the downsides? And convincing them that always the profit is bigger than the cost, of course. So some of the key messages that we have found really useful over the years. One is from a data science framework called CRISP, which is mentioning very clearly that when you are doing data science, then out of the time you put into the project, around 80% is just spent on getting data ready. So working on data quality, joining different data sources, creating data descriptions. So when we were listening to Eero earlier, then again, kind of the pictures and the outcome is nice, but I actually very much appreciate the work that goes into developing the ontologies you need, the entity recognition done on the documents, and all the hard work, which is really the majority of things. And then in the end of the day, when you have your data ready, building the nice user interface, building the visualization is usually much less effort. That's already the simple and easy thing to do. We also had great support from the Estonian Government Office, who last year carried out an analysis on data-driven decision-making. So it's really the point, you have ministers sitting in the government, and they have a crucial decision to make. How and when to inform COVID rules, which benefits to assign in the light of the rising costs of energy, etc., etc. And the current process in this data-driven decision-making is that first you have a need. So someone on the political side or the economic side is saying that there is a need, there is a problem you need to solve. And then the kind of problem-solving team is engaged, and they start looking into the problem and really specifying the details. What is it exactly? What do we need? What is the exact answer we want to answer, and how we want to present it? Then when you have done the problem specification, then you need to start looking for data. You need to go around the public sector, the private sector, also sometimes to other countries, and really trying to find out what are the data sources that I can use to solve this problem. Then you need to consolidate the data, so harmonize it, put it into a single analyzable set, and then you need to apply the methods and algorithms of the analysis, and then you come to the result, the visualization, the conceptualization. In most cases, this process takes something like 1 month, 2 months, 3 months. And again, when the question is about enforcing COVID rules, providing benefits to rising energy costs to vulnerable groups of people, groups of citizens, then you don't always have 2 or 3 months. So the government, so in the end of the day, the ministers themselves were able to come to the conclusion that we actually need to rework this picture. We need to put it into the focus in Estonia that making data findable and the connecting of data sets is something which we need to do on a daily basis, something that we need to do even before a need emerges. We need to connect as much as possible so that when there is a need for a new decision to be made based on data, the problem specification can go, we can go directly to the problem specification, and then we can immediately start the analysis. So potentially limiting the time from the problem statement to the visualization and the result to potentially a few weeks in the best case. And another argument that we have been putting forward is just the cost of data economy. So if you are interested in some numbers, then the European Commission websites are a great resource. So these are, for example, of the explanatory notes of the European Data Act, which you can find in the database of the European legal acts, which are, for example, stating that the data economy value in Europe, in EU, is at least 536 billion by 2025, and probably even more, closer to 1 trillion. EU-wide 1.3 trillion savings in increased productivity, savings of approximately 120 billion a year in the EU health sector. So the numbers are freely available. Just the point is to use these. And this is really key. Once you have convinced the management that you need to deal with data and there are clear benefits for you as the leader, as the organization, as the country in better data management, then you can actually start also talking about the costs and really you get to the point where you get the funding to continue with the next steps. And that's also what happened with the Estonian government CIO office. So when I mentioned that in 2018, the CDO was appointed, then in the end of 2021, they actually got funding for getting 3 more additional positions in the central government CIO office, and also there was funding to appoint data leads in all the individual ministries. And that allowed, for example, for me to be hired into the ministry, but also to start on a larger scale with actually the next steps, which first of all was the skills and competencies. And right now we are in the stage of development in Estonia where the skills and competencies of the data experts, the people really working with data on a daily basis, is the number one thing to do. So over the past 2 years we have established a quite extensive data expert network with 500 plus participants, which doesn't maybe sound too large in Catalonia, but you need to remind yourself that Estonia is a country of 1.3 million people, so we are less Estonians than people in Barcelona. So we actually think 500 plus is quite good, but we want to get to something closer than 1,000, 1,500 people, which would be already about 2% of the public sector employees to be involved in the data expert network. And what we do there is actually very simple. In this large network, we use it for disseminating all kinds of information about new research, new analyses, new tools, new guidelines being available. But even more importantly, we hold regular webinars. So there is a strictly monthly schedule on 2 webinar series. One is on data governance, so sharing best practices on data governance, how you work in-house, what are your roles in your institution, or also in other countries. We try to get people from other countries and from the private sector to talk about their experiences. And there is a second series of events that is AI related, so kind of AI webinars, which is purely then concentrating on the best use cases on how to use AI for the common good, for financial benefit, whatever it is. Next to it, we also have funding to organize a number of annual events. So one that is coming up in the end of July is a summer event, Data Camp, and we actually take around 100 Estonian data governance, data analysis people into the woods in Estonia, no internet, no anything, and basically stay there for 2 or 3 days and talk just about the practice of data governance and data management. There is an open data forum, AI meetup, so 3 major events every year. New ways of experimenting, trying to carry out hackathons, competitions, to really get people involved. So that's the hands-on part. Creating fun ways, fun environments, but also kind of innovative and stimulating environments for people to come together and work on a problem and through this actually get practical experiences. Public e-lectures, so that's not only relevant to data in Estonia, but we have a site called Digital State Academy, where we are trying to create and cater all kinds of e-lectures, so publicly available to everybody. You can go to the site and you can find their lectures on data ABC, the open data ABC, the more advanced open data, data description, data governance, data governance organization, etc., etc. And that's really a valuable resource for people to look into and to start, especially going in terms of data and data literacy and true data literacy. And regular in-person training, so again, more than 500 plus attendees in last year. And what we try to do is to always get the agreement with the lecturers that we can record this session and also publish on YouTube, so very much similar to what you are doing here with this conference. The second thing is that, okay, when we are constantly growing the skills of people actually working in data analysis and data governance, then the next step is to actually support them in the implementation. And here we have a quite recent concept of National Competence Center on Data. So we have established basically a very clear service offering that if you are an agency interested in improving your data governance procedures, interested in developing some AI solutions, implementing PETs or the privacy-enhancing technologies, if you are worried about ethical issues, data protection issues, then you have a clear set of experts available. And again, this is also related to talking and convincing to the convincing of management. So again, it's obviously very much related to funding. And last summer, we were able to secure long-term funding for currently 15 experts. So 15 experts whose only job is to help agencies doing their job. Just to also mention that it's not a kind of physical competence center at the moment, so we are not talking about separate agency, but it's more a collaboration. So it's, when we look at the organization of data governance and data in general in Estonia, then on the top we have the Government CIO office, which I'm representing. So we are currently 5 people there doing the policy and coordination, but actually we are on more practical things. We are always relying also on other agencies. So there is the State Information System Agency, which develops and maintains common IT components for the public sector. Statistics Estonia, who obviously has very, very much practical knowledge on data description, data quality, and also data publication and analysis. Data Protection Agency, the National Archives with their knowledge on data lifecycle management and data value assessment, Estonian Land Board in regard to geospatial data, and Estonian Language Institute in terms of language technologies. And basically all of these together. So the largest proportion is Statistics Estonia, where we have 8 people whose only job is to support agencies in data quality and data description, and more or less 2 persons from each of the other agencies are the ones who are then supporting all other data offices in agencies or sectors in terms of the implementation of data rules. And to govern all of that, we have also established something that we call the National Data Governance Board, which we as the Government CIO office are leading, and where all the members of the 6 specific institutions and all the sectorial data offices, so basically ministry data leads, are represented. We meet regularly on a monthly basis and discuss the strategy and implementation of everything we do. Common tools, I will not spend too much time on that. That's quite obvious, I suppose. So we have had so when we are talking about the publication of information, so making it known where public sector data is, then we have had a kind of state information system registry, an overview of all state registries, or registry of registries, already since 1991. And we have also had, as most other countries, a national open data portal since 2015. But now we are kind of reconsidering the whole situation because we have found out that the kind of central portals are not sufficient. It's not enough. And if you need to create your descriptions, if you need to publish them manually in some kind of weird central system, then these are very often outdated, they are not correct, they are not up to date, they are not good quality. So what we have done very actively over the last 2 years is the development of a national data catalog. So if you're familiar with the term data catalog, then it's a tool that you shall have in every agency nowadays, and which is kind of the catalog of all your data sets, all the content of your data sets, and which helps you to also manage your data quality rules, which helps you to manage the lineage or the movement of the data within different data sets or data manipulation components, and also then implement data value rules, data lifecycle, data archiving, and destruction. So this is something which we decided that we need to have an Estonian-owned data catalog, and over the past 2 years, very much of our technical development attention has gone into developing this thing that is called Rihake right now. And the next item that we throw a lot of attention on is then citizen-centric data governance. And citizen-centric, I suppose, needs a little bit of explanation because there are two meanings. One is just easy-to-use applications, but what we mean with citizen-centric is that citizens are in control of the data, of their personal data. So the government is very much operating on collecting information about individuals, I'm talking here about the all kinds of ownership style registers like car registry, buildings registry, housing registry, but also the health information systems throughout the public sector. So the common paradigm in Estonia is that all of this data in the end of the day belongs to the citizens. And what we want to do is to make sure that the citizens have full control about all the data that is stored in government registries and databases. And at the same time, when this data is used for all kinds of good and beneficial decision-making processes, then it's as transparent, as safe, as ethical as possible. From a technical side, this means that we are also looking very much into the privacy-enhancing technologies that Victoria talked about yesterday. There is also a common component called data tracker being developed and implemented already in quite many information systems, which basically means that you can go to a dedicated site, the datatracker.ee, and when you log in, when you identify yourself, you can see who has been requesting your data for which purposes from all government registries. So a central point of information where you can see how your personal information has been reused. Consent service is the other central component, and that's about giving consent for reuse. So the scenario here is that when a government agency gathers personal data, then they are only allowed to reuse it for the original purpose. So when you gather information into a hospital information system about a patient, then you're only allowed to use this data for the healing, for the treatment of the patient in this hospital. You are not by default allowed to share it with others. But the person itself might have a very good reasons and interest to also share this information with other hospitals, with the state, potentially with some private personalized medicine service providers, etc. And here's where the consent service comes into play. So it's again a technical solution which tries to make it as simple as possible to notify people, first off, if someone wants to reuse your data for some other persons, but also to give the person the opportunity to allow the reuse of data for specific services. And afterwards you can, of course, also evoke the consent if you don't want to give it anymore. But also we are very much working in the principles of responsible data processing. We are working together with UK on the standard of ethical AI, etc. So these are important areas of development. Central rules and guidelines. As I said, it's the central building block of everything. You can't do communication training unless you have central rules of guidelines. At the same time, it's also not something that I don't find it worthy of speaking about too much. It's, in Estonia, we also have the usual set. We have a data governance framework talking about the rules and processes of data governance and data reuse. We have more specific frameworks on data quality management and practical implementation guidelines on different aspects, data description guidelines as well. And we are just now starting to work on a data value assessment framework, so trying to really bring the tools to the agencies on what are the questions to ask. So I have 10 million data elements across all my databases and data sets. I can't describe all of them at once. I can't guarantee full quality of all of that because I don't have the resources, I don't have the people. Where should I start? What are the most valuable data sets to start with? So this very pragmatic approach. And this is actually also, we have found out that it's actually quite similar to archival appraisal in the end of the day. So we are using archival appraisal principles in the development of this framework as well. And we are also connecting it to data lifecycle and lineage guidelines that we are also working on. But in the end of the day, my point is rather that the development of guidelines, it's not even which guidelines you have in the end of the day, but it's how you develop these guidelines. The usual saying is that there is a guideline offered by some ministry or the central government, and it's crap and I don't want to use it. So that's the kind of attitude, that's the thing that we want to get over with. And as such, we are working on the notion of clear ownership versus community-based development. So on the one hand, we still want to make sure that all of the guidelines have an owner, whether it's Statistics Estonia, whether it's the Data Protection Agency or our central government CIO office. But at the same time, the development and further kind of addition of new ideas into specific guidelines happens in a community-based way, that the actual people working in the field, the data officers, the data managers, would also be involved and would be able to say what they think, what actually needs to be covered in guidelines, how they need to develop, what kind of aspects need to be implemented. And in this process, we are also thinking that, especially when we're talking about these very practical, low-level guidelines, we want to move away from this paper form of having a PDF file sitting on some website for 4 or 5 years, and instead building these guidelines on a more collaborative wiki-based way. And the first experiment we are doing is on the guidelines of data description, where Statistics Estonia is maintaining a knowledge base of good ways. So what does a good title look like? How do you describe periods? How to add a description of a data set? How to create semantic descriptions? So it's knowledge that is constantly evolving and what is really hard to grasp in a kind of PDF file which is static for 5 years. So instead, as the knowledge is evolving, new practices are emerging, the guidelines need to be evolving as well. And now finally, I'm then coming also to the legal framework, which you were promised in the title. And the kind of painful experience of Estonia is in the end of the day that laws don't make data fair. We have laws that require data sets to be data sets to be of quality, data sets to be described well, descriptions to be published already for 10 plus years. But the problem is that when the agencies don't see, and especially the leadership, the management doesn't see any need, and the people don't know how to do it, they don't have the guidelines, they don't have the skills and competencies, then they are anyway not capable of addressing it. So instead of really having a huge amount of laws and legal requirements, we are slowly kind of touching the way of having less laws and actually working more with the people in the public sector and the private sector to make things happen. That's, and what we would like to concentrate on in the legal framework is really the key requirements, really making it sure that the right to access data is there and remains there as clearly as possible. So the point that information by default is open. If the public sector and public funding gathers any data, then it should be public. We have no good reasons of keeping data just for the public sector. If the citizen, if the taxpayer has paid for the agency to gather data, then by default this data needs to be open. Of course, unless it's personal data, if it's protected data, then it needs to be, on the other hand, guarded effectively, which is then the principle of citizen centricity. Citizens are in control, explaining as clearly as possible that what are the rights of citizens, what are the possibilities of citizens, and also in some cases, like for example the COVID scenario, trying to as clearly as possible write down in which cases the government can use information about persons for reasons that are against the primary collection of data reasons. Publishing of data descriptions, as said before, we believe more in the competence building, awareness building, in guidelines, but obviously we will keep in the legal framework some key statements about why we need to publish. The implementation of the once-only principle and reuse of data principle, which leads us to the point that when the government already gathers some information, then it should be reusable instead of the data provider having to submit it again and again. And the best example here is the real-time economy, or more clearly maybe the reporting of data from private enterprises to the public sector. So there are hundreds of forms that private sector companies need to fill annually or monthly or quarterly. And last year we started a real-time economy working group, that was now already 2 years ago, that analyzed the reporting burden and reporting costs of the private sector, and we found out that about 80% of the information that we are asking from private sector enterprises is duplicated, or even as 3 or 4 or 5 times. So when we would harmonize the data structures, would harmonize the ontologies and taxonomies used in these reports, we can actually lessen the reporting burden of private sector about 60 or 70%, is our current understanding. And that obviously means that the private sector companies would have much more time to deal with their business instead of dealing with the government. And the regular transfer of data to national archives is obviously one point that is there and that remains there as well. So the national archives as the guardian are not, more and more getting into the kind of the trusted data lake or data warehouse of the public sector, and that this process needs to stay there and has to be there. And obviously there is also EU law, which I'm not going too much into, but there is the Open Data Directive, Data Governance Act, which is being implemented, which has to be implemented by September this year, and actually says to all the EU member states that information that is not only just open data, but also information about the data sets, the data description of data sets that include personal data in the public sector, need to be published. So the data catalogs of agencies need to be published all throughout Europe. So again, that also on the European-wide view, we know where European public sector data is, we know how to access it, and we can be more efficient towards the move to a digital or single market on data. And the last item I want to cover is that also instead of just tuning awareness, tuning skills and competencies and providing all of the support, when we are talking that we are trying to get everybody else into a data-driven mode, then obviously the data sector in Estonia, so our office, Statistics Estonia, and others need to be data-driven. So we are also very much looking into the aspects of how can we monitor the effectiveness of our measures and tasks. So how do we know that the awareness-raising agencies has been done good? How do we know that the support is delivered to the right agencies at the right time? How do we know that our training and community building exercises have been effective? So this year, therefore, we are starting a process where we are first developing a standardized model on data offices. So we are kind of trying to write down, we can do it very much on international sources, but we are also, in addition, writing down what is a data office. So if you want to be a data-driven agency, what roles you need to have, what kind of competencies you need to have, what kind of processes you need to have in place, what kind of documents and relations, procedures you need to generate. So it's kind of a full picture of what needs to be available based on this. We can develop a maturity assessment methodology and then start implementing it regularly, probably on an annual basis. So going around the public sector and asking them, how are you doing? Asking them to fill the maturity assessment and then seeing that, okay, this agency is now on maturity level 3. Last year they were on maturity level 2, and the additional areas of improvement where we can support this specific agency are this and that. So, for example, the data quality procedures are not really up to date yet and are not regularly updated and maintained, so that's the recommendation for this agency to do better. And all of this information from the data audits, from the maturity assessment, and also some quantitative information about published data sets and reuse scenarios and AI solutions being available, we want to cater into a central data health dashboard, which potentially in 2 or 3 years will show us then the health of Estonian data landscape. So, coming to the summary, just saying that in the end of the day, we can also say that data is simple. Reusing data, catering it, managing it, making it available, and implementing some nice use cases of AI is in the end of the day simple if you have all kinds of management involvement and support. So in the end of the day also the money, the resources to what you want to do. If you have a clear understanding of the benefits you want to achieve, I didn't talk too much about it, but it's in the end of the day, the kind of vagueness is always stopping you. If you're just talking about, I need to gather data, I don't know for which purposes, but I need to gather data, then it's kind of stopping you because you can't really take the next practical steps. And that's something that I have seen also in a few archives. So it's most archives, when they start talking about data and data reuse and publishing of data, they start with this, well, I don't know too much about the clear use cases, but I want to do it, and then they struggle in figuring out what exactly they need to do. But once the first use case comes along, is it then publishing information and visualizing information about war casualties in Finland, or mapping historic monuments in Spain, then you get a clear objective and you can start moving forward much more pragmatically and practically. And you have a clear path in front of you. So I'm not saying that data should only be used in certain scenarios. That's really not my point. I too also understand the whole concept of data has to be available for also other purposes than its initial purpose, but you just can't get your feet off the ground when you don't start working also on some very specific scenarios. And the third thing that is really important for me is then the competencies, the knowledge sharing, etc. But again, with the Catalan archivist community, I don't need to talk about it. And as the last thing, from the Estonian perspective, I can also say that one of the most critical things is to have a number of archivists working in the whole organization. So myself, I've been working in the National Archives of Estonia for 20 years before joining the government CIO office, and I was especially hired for my digital archiving skills, so the skills of looking through different data spaces, working with data descriptions, analyzing data quality, and all of these aspects. The head of the support department in the Statistics Estonia is one of the leading archivists and has been working on the theoretical foundations of archiving very much. So it's actually the archival community has a lot to bring in terms of mindset and the principles that we are using. Yes, in data governance we have different tools that we exploit. There are different tools to apply, different methods to apply. These all need to be learned. But actually the mindset we have as archivists is very, very valuable also in the data world. And with that, thank you.
Fantàstic. Moltes gràcies. Bé, hem après coses noves molt interessants. Aquest home ahir es va perdre, crec, el còctel de benvinguda, perquè jo quan tornava el vaig veure assegut en una taula amb l'ordinador i pensava, escolta'm, aquest és el ponent de demà al matí, què està fent? Clar, ja ho he entès quan ha explicat que va tenir la idea de reorganitzar, replantejar la presentació que ens ha fet avui. Me n'alegro que es perdés el còctel, la veritat, no sé vosaltres, ha sigut molt interessant, no? Passar de dir de la normativa, que ja ha dedicat 10 minuts al final, a explicar-nos què cal fer per ser una societat impulsada per les dades, que és el que han fet a Estònia. El primer que m'ha agradat saber és que a Estònia tot es pot fer electrònicament, menys casar-te i divorciar-te. Això és una cosa que m'ha quedat claríssima. I llavors deia, però escolteu, no tot és de color de rosa al meu país, que venim aquí, que som els que en sabem més. Per què? Perquè hem de millorar la gestió de dades. I llavors ho ha connectat amb una cosa molt interessant, que és dir, i per fer això ens cal un bon lideratge. I un lideratge, lligant amb el que ha dit al final, que tingui uns objectius clars. És a dir, no podem dir volem fer coses amb dades sense saber cap a on anem. I hem sabut que el seu país, des de l'any 2018 o fins l'any 2018, no van tenir un ministeri encarregat específicament del món de les dades i que gràcies a això, ens ha explicat després moltes coses que han fet, aquest any acabaran l'estratègia de dades i moltes altres coses. I després ens ha explicat algunes de les coses que fan al seu país per ser una societat realment impulsada per les dades. Jo només en citaré unes quantes que he trobat molt interessant. Tenen una xarxa experta de dades, amb més de 500 professionals d'empreses públiques i privades que es troben, fan networking per estar al dia d'aquest coneixement, perquè hi hagi també aquesta transferència humana de la informació. Que tenen una acadèmia d'informació de l'Estat oberta a tothom, amb molt de contingut perquè les persones, tothom pugui entrar i aprendre de les dades, compartir aquesta informació. Que tenen l'Agència Estatal de Sistemes d'Informació, que tenen en el Ministeri aquest Consell de Governança de Dades, ens ha explicat com funciona, que estan desenvolupant en els darrers 2 anys aquest catàleg nacional de dades, espectacular, i que encara els hi queda molta feina a fer. Ens explicava ara al final, amb les empreses els hi fem omplir milers de formularis cada any, perden moltes hores i molt de temps omplint-los i ens n'hem adonat que el 80% d'aquesta informació ja la tenim. Això m'ha recordat el mòbil, quan et diu, escolta'm, tens 500 contactes que els tens, no us passa a vosaltres, t'avisa que els tenim duplicats, doncs arreglem-ho, traiem aquesta informació. I ara estan treballant amb això, millorant sempre. Un d'aquests objectius, que ell ho esmentava al principi, de tota aquesta societat impulsada per les dades, és que quan algú tingui una criatura i la vagi inscriure al registre, sigui el govern que et digui, escolta'm, en què et puc ajudar? Tinc tots aquests plans per tu. Quin vols? Això per nosaltres és un luxe asiàtic, sí o no? I ells estan a 2 telediaris, ara a veure com li traduïu això dels 2 telediaris a aquest senyor, està a 2 telediaris de fer-ho possible.